Hello. Welcome to Weencast. Ween off the cuff. Riverdale. Season 7, Episode 9. Betty and Veronica Double Digest. I am your Ween. We begin this week with Jughead sitting mournfully at Pop's, reading all of the works of his recently deceased mentor father figure, Brad Rayberry. But of course, as the title betrays, this episode isn't about Sadhead at all. Sadhead, as usual, is but a framing device. He is the structure of the story incarnate, but the story itself is about Betty and Veronica. Betty, we find, is in counseling with Dr. Werther's, and with a whip crack sound effect, we get big title Betty in the funky Archie Comics Betty and Veronica Double Digest font, because they're right. They're doing what has to be done. And Betty is being told by Dr. Werther's that she's off the cheer squad because it's too sexy of an environment for her. But as she points out, high school is a sexually insane environment. There's no part of high school that is safe from sexual insanity. Dr. Werther's doesn't want to hear that. He accuses Betty of being a nymphomaniac, assigned Lars von Trier at high school. Betty doesn't back down, though, even as Dr. Werther starts to ask her weirder and more invasive questions, such as what is her first sexual memory? And then we flash back to see Betty's first sexual memory, where she is 12 and playing Operation with Archie, and when he messes up and makes a dumb smile, we see her 12-year-old face be like, "Oh." And I mean, yes, on one level that's creepy. I mean, on the other level, it's true. I mean, this episode is a hard-hitting episode about uh sexuality, and I'm not even 100% kidding. Um and then he demands answers from Betty. Dr. Werther's demands answers from Betty. Oh my god. I'm just too sleepy to live. He demands answers from Betty about how often does she think of sex. And then we have the Betty Cooper sexual fantasy montage set to the song Lollipop, which longtime fans of the show will recall was also the Black Hood stalking Betty, controlling her sex life ringtone song. More on this later. And we discover from this montage that Betty thinks about sex with every person she sees. When she looks out her window and she sees Archie in the morning when she first gets up, she thinks about fucking him. When she gets to school and she walks up the steps and she sees Fangs hanging out illicitly having a smoke, she thinks about fucking him. When she sees Jughead, yes, even Jughead, walking down the hallway, she thinks about fucking him. When she's in the changing room of the cheer squad, she sees Veronica getting changed. She thinks about fucking her. And when she bumps into Reggie in the hall and they both drop their books, she thinks about fucking him. So two things from this. Yes, Betty is sexually insane. And she is finally canonically bisexual. It's not queer baiting. It's saving the world, as Veronica so famously said. And then at the end of that montage, Betty walks into science class and Dilton has just completed his science experiment. And you might think, oh my god, she even thinks about having sex with Dilton? No. Dilton's science experiment is one of those vinegar and baking soda volcanoes, and it starts shooting. It starts busting. And Betty is actually aroused by watching the volcano bust. But she's like, I don't think I think about sex an abnormal amount, Dr. Werther's. And Dr. Werther's is like, well, all the statistics that you're quoting about how teens think about sex all the time is for boys, but you're a nice young lady. And Betty says, what are my feelings about sex? It's just like, I don't think I'm obsessed with it. I'm just curious. I'm wondering, what's it going to feel like? And, like, what would it be like to enjoy it? I don't want to just think about having sex for marriage. Oh, there's a helicopter coming over my building. Okay, she's gone. And where there's this, like, sex is for two married adults to produce children, and that's it. Um, but then Betty counters, what about my dad's girly mags that he hides in his sock drawer? And Dr. Werther's understandably is like, your dad's girly mags that he hides in his sock drawer? And Betty tells this story that we do see in flashback about how one time she and her family were getting ready to go to church, organized religion in Riverdale. This is big stuff. This is huge news. Organized religion in Riverdale. What does it mean? What does it mean? Um, and she goes in her parents' bedroom and she sees that they have separate 1950s beds, um, which I think is hilarious. But I'm told that my great grandparents actually did sleep in separate 1950s beds, which is hilarious in and of itself. And she goes to look for her dad's cufflinks because he sent her up to the room to get his cufflinks. And she's looking around his sock drawer because I guess that's where he keeps his cufflinks. And she finds some girly mags. And then she looks at her parents' bed and she's confronted with the awful knowledge that her parents are sexual beings. Um, but she's also a little hot for the girly mags, which is understandable. Uh, and then she's like, but when I think about marriage, I think about that would be horrible. I don't want to get married. I want my life to matter. And okay, um, wig. Betty's just speaking truth to power there. She's just telling it like it is. She's a star to me. And honestly, I thought this episode ruled because I thought Betty and Veronica had character arcs that were personally relatable to me. Um, which is the only criterion, the only criterion for whether a show is good or not, as we all know. Once Betty goes back home, she's sitting on her bed writing in her diary, presumably about how Dr. Werther sucks, is a terrible therapist, and also an asshole. Um, and Alice comes in and she's like, Betty, I bought you a bunch of wedding magazines at the grocery store. Um, and Betty's like, but I'm not even dating anyone. Also odd that you would do this a few hours after I told my therapist I think I don't want to ever get married possibly. Um and Alice instead talks about how Betty's eventual presumed marriage will be like the completion of the gratification of Alice's life because she's given her whole life over to producing children and for them to then continue to reproduce in the status of heterosexual reproductive futurity um, is all that she could ask for her existence. And on that note, we switch gears entirely over to the Veronica plotline. Veronica in Archie Comics Bubble Letters whip crack sound effect. Veronica's at school and she's handing out free tickets to a James Dean double feature at the Babylonium. But then, of course, she's confronted by Cheryl, James Dean president of the James Dean fan club, obviously, um, who is like, "Why should I come to the Babylonium when there's a better theater in Greendale?" And Veronica cuts a deal with her to give out free passes in order for Cheryl to generate more publicity, more publicity for the theater. And throughout this conversation, they keep referring to the members of the James Dean fan club as denizens. Cheryl, you've got to bring all your denizens to the screening. Which is number one, stupid. Number two, makes him sound so much like the dean from Community. Like, he would absolutely be like, guys, we've got to bring everyone to the James Dean fan club, James Dean double screening. Dina Ling Ling, let's get your denizens in gear. Uh, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but with the prospect of free passes to the James Dean double feature, Cheryl swears, quote, on the sacred ground of James Dean's grave, that she will bring everyone she can think of, the cheer squad, the basketball team, the fan club. So then Veronica heads over to commune with her two gay minions, Clay and Kevin. And she's so good at alliteration. I think that's why she's one of my favorite characters on Riverdale. She's so good at just saying like the stupidest, most overwritten line, and she sells it. And Kevin and Clay are like, "Hey, if we're giving out free passes to the movie, how are we gonna make any money?" She's like, "Don't worry, we're making all the money on the popcorn." And then she goes straight to the boys' locker room, and she starts stuffing free tickets in the boys' locker room in the lockers. And then all the boys come in, sweaty and mostly nude, and she's like, "Hey guys," and she immediately goes to hit on Reggie. And she hits on Reggie by comparing him to known bisexual James Dean. Because she has a confusing relationship to human sexuality, which is one of the things I admire about her. And then at the show that night at the Babylonium, she sexually harasses Reggie some more and bullies him into taking her on a date after the show. But then there's a disaster in the projection booth. The film is ruined. All the reels of both the James Dean films. Oh no. I'm so sleepy. Um, all of the films, all of the film on the two James Dean films has been overexposed. It can't be shown. What are they gonna do? The film is ruined. They can't screen. Veronica goes out to the audience to tell them what's happened. She's utterly humiliated. Everyone demands their money back, and when Veronica points out they didn't spend any money, she gave them free passes. They're like, "Yeah, we want our damn popcorn money back." And then they start to pelt her with popcorn and drinks, and Cheryl screams, "This is just as bad as if James Dean had died all over again." And I'm not even kidding. She really said that. She really said that. So it's a disaster. Everything's ruined. She has to give back all the money. She can't make her date with Reggie. And so then the next day, she calls up the CEO of the studio. She calls up the CEO of the studio, who is like a really bad actor. And I've heard rumors that he's like the real CEO of like the CW or something. And it would make sense because he's not a good actor at all. And he basically says, "Too bad, so sad." He insults Ronnie's youth, and he says he's out of prints for East of Eden, so he can't send her a new one. And Veronica's enraged. She assigns Kevin and Clay to help her acquire new prints. They call every studio and they say the name of every famous 1950s movie. But of course, Veronica's parents are working against her. They've blacklisted her with all their studio exec friends. She can't get a single studio to send her a print. So Clay suggests they should go after indie studios, try screening B movies, and Veronica is interested. Back in the Betty plotline, she's at therapy again, and Dr. Werther's demands that she tell him about her sex dreams. And she describes her most common sex dream as a student teacher hookup, where she is the teacher. And again, we see a montage of every one of our other characters being the student that she has sex with in her dreams. Sometimes it's Archie, sometimes it's Reggie, sometimes it's Jughead, sometimes it's Veronica. Um, but she admits that it's usually Archie as the student and she, Betty, is the teacher, which has a lot of layers because, as we all know, back in season one, Archie was sexually abused by a teacher, and now that was 67 years ago in the past. In the future, but nonetheless, it did leave a lasting impact on his character. Not so much in that it was explicitly acknowledged, but that his troubling relationship to sex, and inability to like create safe boundaries with people reflects this early abuse by a trusted authority figure. It's hard to be Archie. He's so sad. He's such a sad person. Anyway, And so then she's like, yeah, and then it's his dream, I'm the hot teacher and Archie's the hot student and we like make out and we're about to have sex on the desk and then I look up and the whole class is there. But it's not like, and then she goes back to making out with him, so like the whole class is there. And then she reflects and she's like, I don't even know if this theme in my dreams is really about being seen sexually, because Dr. Werther's like, why are you so obsessed with being seen as a sexual being and being rippling with sexuality and showing your whole ass, which she did do a couple episodes ago, as we know. Um, she's like, I don't know if it's about being seen sexually. It's just about being seen at all. Being seen as a person, as a being with autonomy. A lot to take in there. A lot to take in there. The idea of Betty seeking to be seen as a person, an autonomous being, more than an object, by being seen sexually, as we see through the camera of Riverdale, a camera which is aggressive in its objectification of the bodies of its stars and the sexual situations which the narrative of the show puts them in. What does it all mean? Facing down the challenge of a lifetime. I may not be able to make sense of this until I've completed my master's degree. Back in the Veronica plotline, no, wait, one more important thing about Betty, and then she at the end of the scene, she says that perhaps it's her quest to understand her own sexuality and the sexuality of the world by reading the Kinsey book and getting nude with Archie and showing her pussy on TV. It was all a quest not to understand just sex, but to understand herself. Okay, now back in the Veronica plotline. Veronica's depressedly going to Pops, and there she finds Sad Head sadly sitting in his booth still, reading all the works of Brad Rayberry, thinking about how Brad was his friend and his father figure and then died, allegedly by suicide, but as we all know, was murdered by the milkman. And Veronica goes to talk to him, and this is like the first time that they've talked very much since they broke up. Um, and she asks him about B movies and about how the only movie she could get was called The Crawling Eye. It's not a good movie. It's about a crawling eye. And Jughead suggests she get a gimmick, and she sell the gimmick, and not the shitty movie. And Veronica's like, yes, selling. I love selling. So she's got an idea going. Betty gets home from therapy to find her mom sitting with Reverend Lowe from Riverdale First Reformed Presbyterian. Riverdale has churches. Riverdale has a religious infrastructure. Hello? Hello? I mean, I guess we did see religion in previous seasons because Veronica was confirmed Catholic. Yes. Oh my god, the episode, I can't believe I forgot. The episode about Veronica's confirmation and then she has to pledge that she will reject the devil, and she looks right at her dad, and then she has to pledge that she will serve the force of good, and she looks right at Archie and he has the dopiest smile on his face. Fuck. But Catholicism was the only religion I think that we had ever talked about prior to now, and Catholicism was only mentioned basically as part of the process of ethnicizing Veronica's family as gangsters and thus Catholics. Um, but now to introduce Protestant Christianity changes the whole game. Even though see, we had only Catholicism as a religion in the prior 6 seasons to this one, and no other real acknowledgments of like religion, or the suggestion that there are like churches or religious practice in Riverdale. However, the existence of Christian God and angels had been thoroughly confirmed. And they had appeared on screen, and Satan had been in the show repeatedly. Genius. I love this show. Anyway, Alice and Reverend Lowe are hanging out together, and Betty, understandably, was like, "Hey, Mom, Why is there a fucking pastor in our house? And Alice is like, oh, well, Dr. Werther's recommended I read all your diaries to see your sex fantasies. And I was like, oh my god, we gotta summon a pastor because this girl needs to have the devil cast out of her. And obviously Betty's upset. She's like, no. And the pastor also seems upset and confused. I think that he was led there maybe under false pretenses because they also, Alice makes a joke about him doing an exorcism. I don't think, well, okay, I don't think normal Protestants do exorcisms, but I wouldn't know. So don't trust my word. Um, Betty storms out of the house and she's like, okay, okay. Fucking Werther's is like, alright, he orders my mom to read my diaries. Okay, I'm gonna break into his office and steal his diary and read it. And she does that. She breaks into his office that night and she picks the lock on his desk, but she doesn't find his notebook, where he's been making notes about their therapy sessions this whole time. Instead, instead, she finds everything he's confiscated, including the book Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And I saw someone online saying that it's pretty amazing he had this book because it apparently wasn't published in English until 1958, in the year's 1955. To which I say, Riverdale. I I think we have to remember that every book was published 57 years into the past and the future. So now Betty possesses a copy of Nabokov's Lolita, and she goes to Sadhead and Pops to ask him what's Lolita about. And he's like, well, it's about a pedophilic relationship, um, between a creepy college professor and a 12-year-old girl. Uh, and Betty's like, oh my god, it's a perv book. And Jughead, hero, says, well, we can't make black and white judgments on art. Which is such a is a true statement. Also, such a tiny fraction of all the 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 discourse we could have about like the meaning of a work like Lolita, uh, and also what discussion could we have about the meaning of a work like Lolita on Riverdale? I don't think anyone, even the most feverish Riverdale critics, exponents, um, discoursists like yours truly, could ever have expected that the metatextual world of Riverdale would expand to include Lolita. But here we are, because now Betty's reading it late at night in her bed. Well, back in Veronica's storyline, for some reason, she's allowed to show the preview for her new movie at school during class time with a projector. Whatever, okay. Everyone's skeptical because of how the James Dean screening failed, but she hypes it up as a 4D re release. And when Dilton says, oh, 4D like time, she yells at him because he's a nerd. And she bribes everyone with rubber bouncy balls that have an eyeball on them that they can trade at the concession stand for a box of free milk buds. Milk buds. Then Veronica sets Kevin and Clay to laboring, putting paper mache on a set of large beach balls, which she constantly, throughout the rest of this episode, refers to as your balls. Yes, that's true. And she goes to find Reggie and Archie because she wants them to take command of the balls. Uh, Meanwhile, Betty skips her appointment with Werther's and is like, I've got important reading to do, Dr. Werther, so fuck off. And he starts to get nervous, as he should. And that night at the Babylonium, Veronica has Midge and Dilton doing some hammy acts outside the screening room, to be like, oh, you might want to buy life insurance before this movie because it's so scary. We've got a nurse on site who can wake you up if you faint because it's so scary. And Cheryl, of course, is disgusted, but for some reason she came to see the movie. Um, and everybody gets in their seats, and they got their free milk buds. And the movie starts, and it sucks, and they all hate it, and it's kind of lame until suddenly Veronica hits the fog machine, and the fog is everywhere, and everybody's like, "Whoa, it's so scary!" And then she deploys Archie and Reggie in the balls, which is to say they now have beach balls covered in paper mache on their heads, and those beach balls, paper mache balls, have been decorated to look like giant eyeballs, and they have a bunch of tentacles, and they run out and they like slap everybody around with their eye freak giant tentacles in the fog. And for some reason, the entertainment deprived teens of the 1950s think this is awesome. They think it's amazing. They think it's hilarious. They think it's mind blowing. It's a huge success. Over in Betty's life, she confronts Werther's about Lolita, and he's like, I was reading it to gain insight into you, Betty, because you're sexually insane and Lolita's sexually insane. And Betty's like, excuse me, that's not what that book is about at all. It's a book about a creepy pedophile who takes advantage of a 12-year-old girl by projecting the idea that she's sexually insane onto her. And then Betty says, in another immortal line of Riverdale that no one could have seen coming, she says to Dr. Werther's, Dr. Werther's, you are a kissing cousin to Humbert Humbert, except creepier. And she accuses him of being a sex pervert because he is constantly asking her invasive questions about her sex life, noting them down in his creepy notebook, and clearly getting off on the idea that he can basically boss around a teenage girl about her sexuality and force her to disclose private information to him, which is true. He is a sex pervert and a creep. Um, and she quits therapy, and I say good for her. Back at the Babylonium, now super popular. The show is selling out, but Archie and Reggie uh, don't actually want to do this as a career. They just did it one time as a favor for Veronica, so they lay down their balls. Uh, and Reggie is like, "Hey, Veronica, remember when we were supposed to go on a date?" But Veronica, as always, her perennial tradition, puts the business over Reggie, and is like, "I'm too busy, Reggie." And poor sweet Reggie, rejected, humiliated, heartbroken. That's my special boy. Um, my special boy who's in a film that's showing at Cannes right now, where he's married to MILF Julianne Moore, and it's directed by Todd Haynes. But we don't have time to get into that. Back in Betty's storyline, Alice is enraged that Betty's quitting therapy, but Betty's like, "You can't fix me, Mom. There's nothing wrong with me. I just want like your attention and care. I just want us to like be able to reconcile. I don't want to be creeped upon by this creepy dude." And she's like, "Mom, it seems like you're the one who's truly unhappy. Why do we have such a troubled relationship now? We used to have a happy relationship. Why do you seem like you're afraid of me?" And that's when her father, Hal Cooper, interrupts angrily. And even though Betty protests, Hal intervenes. He banishes Betty to her room for not respecting Alice. And by the next morning, when Betty comes out of her room and tries to connect with her mother, she discovers that her mother has turned on her completely and is now refusing to be Betty's mom. She's like, "You don't need a mom, so I won't be your mom. You seem to know everything. You can make your own damn breakfast." Very disturbing, but we'll talk about that more at the end. Uh, Reggie is waiting at the Babylonian for Veronica so they can finally go on their date. He brought flowers and everything, but she's on the phone with the entertainment barons and she's finally succeeding. When she gets out, Reggie has left. He left the flowers for her, but he's not waiting around. And Ronnie's been locked out of her apartment and cut off financially by her evil parents. So she moves into her office at the Babylonium. And honestly, as she goes to sleep on her couch, she's thrilled. Because she loves her work. She loves her schemes. She loves doing crazy shit more than she likes dating. And that's what I love about her. We close with Sadhead. Still at Pops, but winding down. Finished the last of uh, Brad Rayberry's books. Thinking about what he learned from Brad's work. Time to move on. You know, you can't be stagnant forever. He has to live. It's what Brad would want. And Pop's like, proud of you, son. But then, as Jughead stands up, gets ready to leave, Sheriff Kevin's dad shows up and he's like, Jughead, we need you on the Brad Rayberry suicide case if we're ever gonna solve it. And Jughead says, so much for moving on. And then, like, all the lights go out and it's just the red police light that lights up Cole Sprouse's Jughead face, and he's wearing his stupid whoopee cap. So much for moving on. Next week promo episode called American Graffiti promises that Jughead and Tabitha are going to team up to investigate Brad Rayberry's death and hopefully find out the truth about the milkman, which should rip. What to say about this episode? It ripped. I enjoyed that it was an episode that was like very focused compared to our usual Riverdale. Not that I don't enjoy just being slapped across the face relentlessly with random plots and scenes and characters, because I do. But having the anchoring format of the double digest, where we just had two plot lines that were anchored by two main characters, meant that we actually got somewhere in those plot lines and we got to go somewhere interesting with them. Veronica's plot was just a classic Veronica plot. Schemes, hijinks, Veronica's quote unquote fatal flaw of never putting Reggie over the business. Um, Rip to Reggie. But it turns out it doesn't matter how hot you are. Because what Veronica loves is the movies, slash the stock market, slash the speakeasy, slash the rum business, slash whatever she's getting into any given week in order to screw with her insane evil father, who I have heard will be returning on screen this season, which would be hashtag blessed. Speaking of fathers, though, an even more malevolent father, although less significant in the whole architecture of the show, Betty's dad. Uh, I've seen a lot of people online being freaked out that they used Lollipop, the song associated with her serial killer father and his weird interventions into her life and abuse of her, for the backing track of her sexual fantasies. And I'm sure there are some people who would say, well, it's Riverdale. They probably forgot that they used it already. I genuinely don't think so. There has always been a really troubling vibe between Betty and her dad, and the story of him grooming her to be a serial killer, and the way that like her relationship with her father is somehow a source of tension between her and her mother. And fundamentally, uh, there is a weird molester subtext with her relationship with her father. And I think that that is significantly confirmed by this episode, by Betty's search to be able to take control of her own sexuality, by the parallels produced when she reads and contemplates Lolita, even though it's mostly used as a comparison to absolutely take down and destroy Dr. Werther's. Um, Obviously, my understanding of what that book is about, because I haven't read it myself, is that it is about the process of molester grooming, which is what we went through back in season 2 and 3, 4. I don't remember. The whole process by which Betty revelates about how her father was grooming her to be a serial killer, I feel like was spread out across a number of seasons, um, and came, in and out of the the plot lines of any given episode or season. But the point is, she she is confronted, um, by this idea once again, especially when Hal turns her mother against her, and she's trying to understand what happened in her relationship with her mother, and she asked those very poignant questions of like, why is our relationship broken? Why do you seem afraid of me? Um, and of course, we don't know in this universe what happened to Polly or to Chick or to Charles. We've had one reference, oblique reference to Betty's sister, who may or may not be Polly, as we know from the fungibility of Riverdale family here, 57, 67 years in the past and the future. Um, but basically, the strange controllingness of Betty's father throughout the entire series, but occurring once again now that he's alive again, is something that has always had a troubling sexualized element to it. And although in this episode we mostly see Betty's mom as the like villainous face, um, we also get her saying a lot, you don't know what I've sacrificed for you, you don't know what I've done to protect you. And Betty keeps asking, what do you mean? What do you mean? Um, and there's a part of me that is concerned that soon we will rediscover that as like her dad is a serial killer and he is trying to produce her as a serial killer again. But that's all. These are just my conjectures at this time. Of all the episodes so far this season, this may be the one that we have to spend the most time recontemplating in the future. Um, None of this is settled. None of this material is a settled issue until we see the final episode, whatever that may be, whenever that may be, however it may be. The truth is out there, and Riverdale, it's not over till it's over. With that, I conclude for the week. Thank you for listening. This has been your Ween.